In 2007, the World Rally Championship saw a close fight for the title between the Citroën of Sebastien Loeb and the Ford of Marcus Gronholm. After losing out to Loeb in 2006, even with Seb missing the final 4 rallies, Marcus was determined to take the title away from him in 2007. The pair would share an amazing battle throughout the year, with the rally in New Zealand being the most notable, where Marcus won the rally by only 0.3 seconds. Ironically, my first video was about this rally, which you can check out in the card on the top right. Ultimately though, Marcus would once again just miss out on the title to Loeb, with the title defining moment coming at the first ever Irish rally, where Marcus would catch a wet patch and crash into a concrete block, giving him whiplash in the process. This would end up being the last time that Marcus would fight for a title, as 2 months prior to the crash at Ireland, he announced that he would be retiring from WRC at the end of the season, with Jari-Matti Latvala, who was driving for the Stobart VK Ford team that year, being confirmed to be his replacement. But with Jari being relatively inexperienced, it left Marcus's teammate Mikko Hirvonen to step up to the plate and become the new team leader at Ford, with him being tasked to dethrone Loeb from the top of the mountain. Hirvonen's first year as team leader in 2008 didn't exactly go according to plan, as despite taking 3 wins that year, he could not match the superior pace of Loeb that year, with Loeb taking a record 11 wins that year to win his 5th World Rally title, beating Hirvonen to the title by 19 points, which would have been more had it not been for a retirement at Sweden and a frustrating rally at Jordan, which saw him finish outside the points in 10th. With him being convincingly beaten by Loeb that year, Mikko was determined to step up to the plate and give Loeb a run for his money in 2009. However, it's safe to say that the start of the 2009 season didn't go according to plan. The first round of the season bizarrely took place at Rally Ireland rather than Rally Monte Carlo, which ended up being off the calendar for 3 years due to a rotational system that the WRC were doing at the time. Amidst the financial crisis that carried over from the end of 2008, only 2 manufacturers were present in the championship, with both Subaru and Suzuki pulling out after the conclusion of the 2008 season. The calendar also saw a reduction as well, with only 12 rallies being scheduled for 2009, a drop of 3 from the previous year. With a shorter calendar, it essentially meant that every point was more crucial than it had been in previous years. However, for Sebastien Loeb and the Citroën team, it didn't seem to faze them, as despite getting off to a poor start in the rally due to choosing the wrong tyres and the rain affected rally, Loeb would charge his way through the order to record the first win of 2009, leading home a 1-2 ahead of Danny Sordo. Mikko Hirvonen, on the other hand, was nowhere near the pace as expected due to the huge advantage the Citroëns had on tarmac compared to the Fords. Mikko would mitigate that damage by finishing best of the rest in 3rd, but over 2 minutes behind rally winner Loeb. Luckily for Hirvonen though, the next rally would take place on snow, specifically at Norway rather than Sweden, which took a year out from the calendar for the same reason as Monte Carlo. With Scandinavian rallies tending to favour drivers within that area of Europe, there was huge expectations that Hirvonen would make amends from the crushing defeat at Ireland. And it looked like it was going to be the case, with Hirvonen having the edge on Loeb during the first day. However, on the final stage of the day, Hirvonen would tactically back off to allow Loeb to lead into day 2 in the hopes of having a favourable stage position for the second day. However, this would turn out to be a mistake, as Loeb would end up increasing his lead on day 2 and open up the gap to 15 seconds by the end of the second day. Hirvonen would slice into that gap on day 3, but it wouldn't be enough, as Loeb, to everyone's surprise, would come through to take his first win on snow since 2004, winning by just under 10 seconds ahead of Hirvonen. This meant that Hirvonen would be 6 points behind Loeb in the standings, and this gap would end up getting bigger in the next few rallies, as Loeb would carry the momentum of both Ireland and Norway into the next 2 rallies, with him winning comfortably at both Cyprus and Portugal. Hirvonen would finish second in both of these rallies to ensure he didn't lose too much ground to Loeb in the standings, but the next rally at Argentina would see Hirvonen's championship hopes nearly get crushed. During the rally, Hirvonen was involved in an intense fight for the win with the two Citroens of Sebastien Loeb and Dani Sordo. Both Loeb and Hirvonen would overtake Sordo on day 2, with it looking like it would be the duel between the pair of them for the rest of the rally. However, midway into day 2, Hirvonen reported a sudden rise in engine temperature, and with smoke coming out of his car, Ford ordered him to back off in order to get to the end of the stage so he would have a chance to fix it on the roadside before the next stage. However, despite Hirvonen's best attempts at trying to sort out the problem, even with his brilliant mechanical knowledge, there was nothing he could do to sort the problem, and as a result, he was forced to retire from the rally. And with Loeb going on to make it 5 out of 5 wins, it meant that the gap between them had grown from 10 points to 20 points, with even Loeb's teammate Sordo overtaking Hirvonen into second. Judging from his body language after he was unable to fix the car, Hirvonen thought that with 7 rounds to go, the championship was already over. However, little did he know at the time that the next few rallies would end up swinging the championship in his favour. The next rally would take place at Sardinia in Italy, where road position would end up being a talking point throughout the rally. With it being a gravel rally, it meant that the further back you started on a stage, the better grip you would end up having, and with Hirvonen third in the standings, and the stage order being determined by the order of the Drivers' Championship, it meant that in theory, he would have better grip on the stage than the two Citroen drivers. And whilst that would be true, to his annoyance, he would end up being second on the road rather than third due to Dani Sordo having turbo issues before stage 1, which resulted in him starting on the stage late. This, as you would have expected, led to conspiracy theories that Citroen were making the turbo issue up in order to tactically ensure that Sordo had better conditions for the stage. Hirvonen's frustration would be added further when Loeb would overtake him for the rally lead once the stage order changed after the halfway point of day 1. With stage position being very important for day 2, it meant that drivers were once again deliberately backing off on the final stage of day 1 in order to have better grip for the next day. However, Hirvonen would once again misjudge this, as with Loeb conceding 23 seconds, Hirvonen in his attempt to give up sufficient time would back off way too late, running out of stage in the process, and as such handing Loeb the advantage of having the better stage conditions for day 2 in order to overhaul the 40-second deficit to Jari-Matti Latvala, who was leading the rally after day 1. But luckily for Mikko, Loeb would not take advantage of the better stage conditions, as the rally would end up being a disaster for the Frenchman. Firstly, he would receive a 10-second time penalty for being late to a stage as a result of being forced to bleed his brakes on the roadside, and then to add insult to injury, Loeb was forced to stop on stage 11 to change a tyre as a result of damaging a valve. This saw Loeb drop to 4th, over a minute behind leader Latvala, wrecking any chance he had of making it 6 out of 6 wins. And whilst he would get back up to 3rd by the end of the rally, Loeb would end up losing the podium and drop to 4th as a result of receiving a 2-minute time penalty for undoing his seatbelts before he stopped the car to change the tyre. This handed the initiative to Ford, with Latvala leading ahead of Hirvonen. Mikko would overhaul the gap to his teammate, but as a result of being caught up in Jari's dust trail, it meant that he was unable to pass him legitimately. With Mikko being unable to pass, people then began to ask questions as to whether Ford would ask Latvala to back off to allow his teammate to take the lead. This wouldn't happen, however, as with Mikko refusing to accept team orders, to which Ford accepted his demands, Latvala, after a frustrating start to the season, would come through to take his second career win, ending Loeb's streak of wins that he had since the 2008 Wales Rally GB. Hirvonen would finish second to make it a Ford 1-2, but with his refusal to accept team orders, irrespective of whether he was the closest challenger to Loeb or not, people began to ask questions as to whether Mikko would regret that come the end of the season. Whatever the case, it didn't seem to affect Hirvonen's pace, and in the next few rallies, Mikko would go on an absolute tear, as with Loeb crashing out at the next rally in Greece, Mikko, despite pressure from both Danny Sordo and Petter Solberg, both of which would end up retiring from the rally, would come through to finally take his first win of the season, slicing Loeb's lead in the standings to just 7 points. Then the pendulum would officially swing at the next round in Poland, as with Loeb making another error, which forced him to sit out the remainder of day 1, having to resume from day 2 via the Super Rally rules, Hirvonen drove a commanding rally to take his second win of the season, with Loeb only being able to recover to 7th, thanks to Sebastien Loeb and Evgeny Novikov in the Citroën Junior team backing off to allow him through. It would have been 8th had it not been for Jari-Matti Latvala making a silly error on the final stage and ending his rally in the process, preventing Ford from grabbing another 1-2. But regardless, the result meant that Hirvonen took the lead in the standings by 1 point, and he would increase that lead a bit more, as a dominant performance ahead of Loeb would see him win his home rally of Finland for the first ever time in his career, bringing the gap up slightly to 3 points. Then, at the next rally in Australia, a dramatic moment would happen in the title fight. Needing to bounce back after a difficult run of rallies, Loeb would put in a dominant performance to claim his 6th win of the season, with Hirvonen just being able to fend off Sordo in second. However, after the rally had concluded, Hirvonen was later declared the winner after the 3 leading Citroens of Loeb, Sordo and Citroën Junior driver Ogier were handed 1-minute time penalties for a technical infringement on their roll bars. This meant that instead of Loeb cutting the gap to just 1 point, Hirvonen would open up the lead to 5 points, and with 2 rounds to go, Loeb needed to dig deep and also have the support of his teammate if he wanted to prevent Hirvonen from ending his streak of titles. Luckily for the Frenchman, the next rally in Spain was a tarmac rally, and both Loeb and Sordo would use the advantage of the Citroen's pace on tarmac to good effect, as the pair would completely dominate the rally to record a 1-2 finish, with Loeb leading Sordo to victory. This, as a result, meant that Citroën retained their manufacturer's crown from 2008, and with Hirvonen finishing a long way behind in 3rd, it meant that going into the finale in Wales, Hirvonen only led the championship by just 1 point. And with the muddy cold conditions that Wales Rally GB had to offer, the championship could have gone either way. On the first day of the rally, Loeb, thanks to having a better stage position, would lead the rally ahead of Hirvonen, but only by 5 seconds. Then on day 2, Hirvonen on the opening stage would reduce Loeb's lead to just over 2 seconds, and at this point, it looked like Hirvonen would swing the advantage back in his favour. However, in the next 2 stages, Hirvonen's chances of winning his first ever title would take a hammer blow, as Loeb would open up the gap again, this time by a massive 20 seconds, with him finding another 10 seconds in the afternoon loop to end the second day over 30 seconds ahead of Hirvonen. It looked like at this point that the championship was out of reach for Mikko, and that Loeb would win his 6th world title. However, on the final day, Loeb would suffer from a turbo issue, which in turn allowed Hirvonen in the first 2 stages to take nearly 15 seconds out of Loeb's lead. And with Loeb's issues persisting, if Hirvonen could keep up this pace in the final 2 stages, then there was every chance he could snatch the title right at the end. But sadly for Mikko, disaster would strike on the penultimate stage, as whilst going flat out to try and cut into Loeb's lead even more, Mikko would land his car awkwardly over a jump and in the process dislodge his bonnet. As he progressed further into the stage, the bonnet was dislodged even further, to the point where it was affecting his visibility. With the visibility getting worse, Mikko had no choice but to stop on the stage to allow his co-driver Jarmo Leitonen to rip the bonnet off so he could see again. This in turn cost Hirvonen a minute to Loeb, and despite going quickest on the final stage, the championship was over. Loeb would go on to win the rally, and with it became a 6th-time World Rally Champion. Whilst Loeb celebrated what was arguably his toughest title to win, Hirvonen was left devastated that he came up short, and was left to wonder if there were certain things he could have done differently. Now you can imagine that me being a Loeb fan, that I was over the moon that my favourite rally driver of all time was able to retain his title, especially given that it looked like for a while that it wasn't going to happen. But even though I am a Loeb fan, even I have to admit that 2009 was a missed opportunity for Hirvonen, and in my opinion, there were 4 rallies during the year that I think cost Hirvonen any chance of ending Loeb's streak. 2 of which were down to him, 1 of which was completely out of his control, and another, which I believe both he and Ford played a part in, that for me cost them the title. More on that later. The first rally which cost him the title was the second round at Norway. On day 1, Hirvonen led the rally quite comfortably ahead of Loeb. However, on the final stage of the first day, Hirvonen backed off to allow Loeb to lead the rally heading into day 2, with the theory being that he would have the better stage position than Seb. However, this would turn out to be the opposite, and as a result, Hirvonen had inadvertently given Loeb the best stage position, which Seb would use to his advantage to pull out a gap on Hirvonen. Although Mikko would be able to reduce the lead on day 3, the damage was already done, and 10 points went the way of Loeb. Had Mikko not backed off on day 1 and kept his foot to the floor, he would have more than likely have walked away with the win that day instead of Loeb. But hindsight is a wonderful thing at the end of the day, and although that mistake was down to Mikko, at the same time you can't really blame him, as in theory he should have had the better stage position, but for whatever reason it was better on that day to start in an earlier position on the stage rather than a later one. As superhuman as rally drivers are, they aren't Houdini, so expecting Mikko to see into the future is just ludicrous. Another rally where the title went away from him was of course the finale in Wales. Hirvonen, in his pursuit of Loeb, who was suffering from a turbo issue, went over a jump at high speed and would end up landing awkwardly, which in turn dislodged the car's bonnet and caused issues to his and Jarmo Leightonen's visibility. Now on this occasion, blame has to go mostly to Hirvonen, as sensing a chance to overhaul Loeb before the end of the rally, he overdrove the car to the point where he ended up causing significant damage that would in the end close the book on his title hopes. Had he took the jump correctly, one could make the argument that he would have overhauled Loeb in the end and snatched the title from right under his nose. But in the heat of the moment, and with him being over 30 seconds behind going into the final day, can you really blame him for pushing that hard? At the end of the day, he didn't really have anything to lose, and only had a sniff of snatching it on the final day when Loeb was suffering from car issues. The examples I've currently given are ones that were under his control, but the other 2 I'm about to give are ones which were beyond his control. To a certain degree with one of them, as you'll find out later. The first one, which was definitely beyond his control, was at Rally Argentina. Fighting with Loeb for the win on day 2, Mikko's car would suffer from a sudden rise in engine temperature, forcing Mikko to back off to get to the end of the stage. When he eventually did finish the stage, Mikko on the road section tried to do a quick repair job to try and bring down the engine temperatures in order for him to continue in the rally. Sadly, despite his best attempts, the issue was far beyond repair, and Mikko was forced to retire as a result. Without the engine issues, it's unclear whether Mikko would have beaten Loeb or not, but one thing's for sure, he definitely would have finished in the top 2 at the very least. But thanks to this engine issue, he ended up losing 10 points to Loeb, which allowed him to open up the gap to 20 points. Now you might look at the events of that rally and think that was the one that undeniably cost Mikko the title, but in my opinion, I don't think it is. The one which I believe was the one that ultimately cost Mikko the title was at Rally Sardinia. In that rally, Ford were comfortably holding on to a 1-2 finish, with Latvala leading the way ahead of Hirvonen. Whilst Mikko did overhaul Latvala's lead on day 3, Mikko was unable to pass him due to being caught in Jari's dirt trail, which in turn affected his visibility. Because of that, the logical thing that Ford should have done in that situation was to invert the cars in order to allow Mikko to take the win and for Latvala to consolidate the 1-2 in order for Mikko to take a huge bite out of Loeb's lead in the standings. But due to Ford adhering to a request from Mikko, the team didn't do that, and instead allowed Latvala to win the rally, preventing Hirvonen from gaining another 2 points. Now some people will look at that and say, well, Mikko said he didn't want team orders, so you can't really blame the team for agreeing to his demands. Well, I'm sorry to say, but yes I can. Yes, the manufacturer's title is more important for a team, and on that day, Ford got the maximum result. But as it is in Formula 1, it also looks good for a team if they have one of their drivers also win the title, and on that day, Hirvonen was the closest challenger to Loeb. Regardless of what Mikko's request was, Ford should have taken that decision out of Mikko's hands and actually done the logical thing of ordering Jari to step aside to allow Mikko through, as not only would they have still finished 1-2 to get the maximum points in the manufacturer's standings, but they also would have ensured that Mikko would have taken the maximum points out of Loeb's lead to put him a bit more closer to his rival. Now people will try and make the argument that both Mikko and Ford believe that the driver's title fight was already over, as Loeb had a 20-point lead going into that rally. But for me, I think that's irrelevant. Mikko mathematically still had a chance of winning the title, and regardless of what the points gap was, you still have to have the mentality that you're still in the fight, as like with any other motorsport, and like the great Murray Walker said, anything can happen. And on that weekend, something did happen, as Loeb in that same rally would have a nightmare of a weekend, as along with him having a 10-second time penalty for being late onto a stage, he would also on that same stage be forced to stop and change a tyre due to sustaining damage to one of the tyre valves, which in turn put him out of reach of the 2 Fords. Then, to add insult to injury, Loeb after the rally had concluded would receive a 2-minute time penalty, which dropped him to 4th for undoing his seatbelts while the car was still moving under his power. Now yes, it's hard for Ford to anticipate that Loeb would have had that penalty, but even so, that shouldn't matter, as at the end of the day, as mentioned earlier, anything can happen, and when you are in a championship fight like Hirvonen was, every point matters, especially in a season which only consisted of 12 rounds. Fact is, okay, they should have ignored Mikko's request, and if Mikko decided to go against what the team were requesting, then the blame would go to him. As we saw with Lando Norris in 2024 in Formula 1, being the nice guy doesn't win you titles. Sometimes you've got to be selfish in order to achieve your lifelong goal, and what Mikko did that day, regardless of whether or not Ford should have listened to him or not, showed that for however insanely quick he was, he didn't have that selfish bastard in him to get the measure of Loeb, and that is why fundamentally, Loeb edged him to the title that year, as even on his bad days, Loeb knew how to quickly turn that around, as proved in the final 2 rallies in Spain and Wales. To me, this was possibly Hirvonen's only chance of winning a title, as whilst he would fight for the title again in 2011 after coming off the back of a frustrating 2010 season, it never felt like once Hirvonen was ever going to win that title, unlike in 2009, where had things played out differently in Sardinia and Mikko had a different mindset, then maybe we would be sitting here talking about his amazing title win rather than what might have been. But ultimately, that didn't happen, and that is why for me, this is the one year that got away from Mikko.